previous couple of generations, the car and the suburbs have kind of been this idea of freedom. But now looking at the newer generation, our idea of freedom is, if we have good transit service, we can get wherever we need to be without being tied to a car.
From a rather windy North End in the beautiful Motor City, I'm Jer Stays. It is December 30th, 2019.
And I'm Shianne Irani, and this is your Daily Detroit.
We are in the holiday season, and we're in that weird doldrum space between Christmas and New Year's.
I know. What is today? I don't even know.
I had to look at the calendar like 3 times to make sure that it was Monday, it was all those things. I'm just lost.
I know. I think I'm lost, you're lost, our listeners are lost. Like, what is it?
But we're not going to leave you without a podcast.
Absolutely not.
Because you will not be lost without things for your ears.
Right.
And so what we're going to do, we had another episode in mind that we were going to play as one of our best ofs.
We really did.
But I decided to move something up to the front. I decided to move the most popular episode on Spotify for our podcast to the front of the line. And this episode, I think, has really good timing. It's called How to Make the Bus Sexy. And it's a conversation with Sarosh Irani, who you may or may not know him, but he is somebody who is part of Wayne State, goes to Wayne State.
Right.
Does a lot of work around transit and came up with some really bright ideas. And it was a really interesting conversation. And we thought we'd run it because of, Twitter.
I mean, what happened on Twitter today, Jer?
I think we know what happened on Twitter.
I know what happened.
Yeah,
you know what happened.
We all know what happened. This thing has spiraled over the last few days. The State House Republican Transportation and Appropriations Chair, Matthew Maddock, he is of the 44th District representing White Lake. He has been pretty much throwing firebombs against transit over the last few days, specifically fighting against the idea of having a regional transit plan so that Oakland County, Wayne County, and Washtenaw County can do their own, basically, millage to pay for transit. And he's been very strong in his words against it, including saying things like making people ride the bus is mean.
Why would it be mean?
You ride the bus. I've ridden the bus. Sven rides the bus.
Yeah. This guy is completely, sometimes I can't come up with the words. So I'm just going to say what the millennials say, the young millennials say.
Well, because you are a millennial, technically.
I am technically a millennial, but like all the young kids are saying, okay, boomer.
Well, it's interesting because it has created quite the reaction. The incomparable Laura Herberg over at WDET had tweeted out something about that people should share their pictures of the full buses. And so, of course, we oblige from a picture that we happen to have already shared back in August of a bus in the suburbs, in fact, in Madison Heights, chock full.
Of people?
Of people riding
people
it, using
rival,
it.
Going to and fro?
Right, to and fro, if you will.
Right, okay.
And I don't think they felt like it was mean.
No, absolutely not. Okay, so the reason she shared this on Twitter is because he asked people to share pictures of buses with people on them, because I don't think he thinks that people actually ride the bus.
Well, and they do. But the other thing about it too is I get really queasy, just like I would be queasy about people down here making decisions for the UP. I get really queasy about somebody out in White Lake trying to tell me what's best for us in the Woodward Corridor, Wayne County, all that kind of stuff, and try to stop something in its tracks when we don't even know what the whole plan will be yet, and
right.
Just being so anti. And then some of the things that he talked about are just not based in reality. So one of the points that he makes is, take Uber or Lyft instead.
Uber and Lyft are very expensive.
Well, and the other side about that is that both Lyft and Uber don't make money.
No.
I really dislike this conservative argument around, we'll just go to ride sharing. Because the thing is that that ride sharing cost right now is being subsidized by venture capitalists. Mm-hmm. You cannot use that as a crutch. So are you going to offer that then the government should step in and subsidize if those companies don't make money? And should all these things, these public goods, do public goods need to be for-profit entities? Right.
Well, and I believe the last time RTA went up, one of the key things that they were trying to kind of give to Macomb and Oakland County was extra money for
direct door-to-door transit,
which would be Uber and Lyft. So they were actually trying to offer this to the powers that be in Oakland and Macomb, and that wasn't even good enough for them then. So what makes that good now?
Well, that's the whole thing. I think it's a shifting target. I don't think there's intellectual honesty in this argument. I mean, even the city of Detroit does work with Lyft, especially for late nights, to give you a jump, and they'll subsidize it a few bucks, and that's off of those main transit lines. But to rest an entire system on ride sharing seems to have like critical issues with it, especially for commuting. And if you think about how much this adds up as far as cost, $10, $15, $20 a ride both ways, like that just doesn't make any sense.
Perfect example. I just want to say that and I know it was Christmas, so it was like premium time, but to get my uncle from Grosse Pointe to Northville, for Christmas, I understand that it is premium time and peak time and all that. It would have been $100 one way.
Well, and hey, Shia, I see you whipping out your phone right now. What would have it been right now at this time in the middle of non-peak time? It's 3:20 p.m.
It would have been $36.46.
All right, so let's say you work, like you have to go across these places and go to work. You're not going to spend $36 each way.
No, that's $60 a day. That is.
And should the government subsidize $60 or $70?
Guess what? How much is it to ride the bus?
$2 for a 4-hour pass.
Right. It's dumb. This whole argument is completely bonkers.
Well, with that said, I think it would be great for us to jump into this conversation with Sarosh Irani. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all the listeners. Also, before we get into it, a quick thanks to Kevin, Leslie, and John, who all joined us as members on Patreon. Thank you for helping make a better Metro Detroit together. We really appreciate that Christmas spirit.
We absolutely do. Thank you so much. And we can't wait to keep making podcasts for you to listen to.
I love to talk to people who are doing things on the ground in very practical ways to help Detroit be a better place. And whether it's through acts of good work or through looking at smarter ways to make things happen, I always appreciate that. Sarosh, welcome to Daily Detroit.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So the first thing that caught my eye, I mean, I've seen you on Twitter and things like that, but the thing that really caught my eye recently is you got featured by Streets Blog in regards to bus shelter placement. And this might seem like a minor thing, but why does it matter where the bus shelters go?
So bus shelters and bus stops in general are really important aspects of any transit system and therefore important aspects of any city. The bus shelters that we looked at, we just realized that a lot of times bus shelters aren't placed where they need to be, in that people will be waiting at bus stops without shelters, so they'll be exposed to the elements, the wind, the rain, the snow. It gets pretty cold in Detroit. And so we realized that the bus shelters are placed not as much where they need to be. And so we looked at how can we better distribute the bus shelters throughout the city in a more equitable fashion so that kind of we increase the number of people who see the benefit of bus shelters.
So to give people an idea, I know we're the motor city, but there's a lot of bus usage, isn't there here?
So I think a couple of years ago, the University of Michigan came out with a study where they found that over 26% of households in the motor city don't have reliable access to a car. So that really brings the transit system into focus because, if that many people don't have access to a car, the bus system is the next best way to get around.
Well, and if you think about households that are maybe sharing a car too, so maybe they have access to a car, but there's only one car amongst 4 people or something like that.
Exactly. So the bus system, even in the motor city, is really important. And DDOT does a great job of serving Detroiters with the limited resources they have. So and public transit always provides an economic benefit to any city. It provides more options to people to get around. For example, like I took the bus down here today. I don't own a car. I could have walked. I could have taken the Q line. I could have biked. But for me, the bus was just the most effective way to get down here. So that's the route I chose.
People might be surprised to see that you live in the motor city without a car. I mean, this is going to sound like a pedestrian question. I know a little bit of the answer because I've done it before. But how is it living in the motor city without a car?
It is a bit of a challenge. Definitely if I did own a car, there would be less thought involved in my trips. I'll often plan trips around the bus schedule, or I'll plan trips to places that, I know bus route goes to. So for me, for example, if I have to go grocery shopping, I'm going to Eastern Market on the weekends, I'll usually bike there because there's no direct bus route from Wayne State to Eastern Market, so I'll have to take a transfer. So in that regard, usually biking is the quickest way. But then if I'm getting downtown, I have like a couple bus options to get there. I can always take the Q line. And then, if I'm going out to Southwest, I'll just have to plan my trip and make sure that if there's any transfer that I can make that transfer in order to make the trip like work well. So it is definitely a challenge being in the motor city without a car, but I've been able to make it work so far, and it's nothing too major.
So things like groceries and stuff, you're able to do all that?
Yeah, definitely. And like I also commute from Farmington Hills. So there's a bus that gets me there too. In that regard, I also have that option. So most things I'm able to do without the bus, without the car. Sorry.
How important is it that there is service in the suburbs? I know that it's kind of been a political football to cut transit funding in Lansing with the roads deal and all that other stuff.
Yep.
A lot of people say, well, we can't afford transit because we need to fix our roads. But I think a lot of studies show that transit actually takes people off the roads and lowers the wear and tear and all that kind of stuff. But do you see the same kind of need in the suburbs for transit as you do in the city?
I definitely do. I mean, there was, in Cranes, Detroit, there's recently been articles about, people who literally have jobs in Novi and say they're from Detroit. They literally have to get off the bus at the border of Farmington Hills and Novi because Novi is a smart opt-out community. So they're literally, the bus is not allowed to run in the Novi city limits. So people will get off the bus and have to walk or bike a couple miles to their jobs. So it's all about connectivity, right? So if people, if there's certain cities that don't opt into smart, like that's just like a Swiss cheese system where there will be holes and people can't get to where they need to go. In the suburbs, like a lot of people own cars, the vast majority. So there is kind of the perception that, if everybody has cars, everybody can just drive. But, part of the reason that our roads are so bad is because they're heavily used. And with public transit, if we can decrease the use of cars, have less cars on the road, that will be another factor that will help bring down the costs necessary to keep our roads in tip-top shape.
Yeah. It strikes me because we've had so many attempts at making regional transit happen that really haven't happened, to be honest. What is your feeling long term on things? So you're a younger guy. You are still attending Wayne State University. You did really interesting research work around these bus shelters. It's something that there's a lot of lean in here where I'm going, shouldn't they have kind of figured some of this stuff out themselves? Like where to optimally put bus shelters.
Right.
I think in the Streets blog post they talked about how they were still left over from before a service change like years ago. Is that the case?
So DDOT service was cut, I believe around 2008 because of, the financial crisis. So the bus shelters, to be honest, like DDOT has a lot on its plate and they have relatively limited resources. So for DDOT, a lot of the emphasis has been on getting good service, making sure the buses run on time, making sure the buses get where they need to be, reducing crime on buses. So bus shelters and bus stops haven't been as much of a priority, understandably, because they have, other things going on. So this was kind of, I just saw it as, an inefficiency in the system. And I'm like, hey, I know a professor who's really interested in this. Maybe we can help out. So it was just a cool way that, we got to kind of study the system, kind of, make a recommendation. But, props to DDOT. They've recently turned things around. I've seen a definite improvement in the bus system in recent years. Ever since I started at Wayne State, I've seen like a noticeable increase in service. The buses, for me at least, run on time a little bit more often. So props to them. They've done an amazing job. But this was just something we thought that, we could suggest to help DDOT make the system a little bit better.
Well, as part of the greater conversation, one of the things that keeps coming up when I talk to employers or other regional leaders that are pro-transit is that younger talent, people who are desirable to keep in the region to hire for jobs, they want things like transit.
Definitely.
Sounds like you're the kind of guy that's going right into that mix. What is your opinion of that theory, and does that matter? And is that going to affect whether or not you stay in Detroit?
Well, okay, in my opinion of that theory is it's really accurate. Personally, at least, I have like no intention, like zero intention of ever owning a car. And that's something my parents are like, what? Like, they don't understand that. But since they're from a different generation, it's understandable. But for me, and even talking to my friends, a lot of the time, if they don't have to have a car, they don't mind it. I think that, the previous couple of generations, the car and the suburbs have kind of been this idea of freedom. But now looking at the newer generation, our idea of freedom is, if we have good transit service, we can get wherever we need to be without being tied to a car. So for that, I definitely think that theory holds a lot of weight. And, the numbers back it up. Different cities that, maybe the parents left to go to the suburbs, the kids are moving back into the city. So it definitely makes a lot of sense. And for me, definitely transit is something I'll look into. I'm really interested in staying in Metro Detroit and specifically the city of Detroit long term. I know I'm pretty sure this is where I want to be. But transit will definitely make that a more attractive proposition for me and for other people of my generation.
One of the things I've learned, though, is that people pay for and money mysteriously appears for things that people actually want, right? And it has been difficult to move the regional conversation towards transit. I mean, you can look at our Facebook comments. We have some people who are very supportive of transit, but then a lot of folks are going, you'll pry my car from my cold dead hands.
Right.
How do you kind of change that? Or do you think that's generational? Do you think that over time this is inexorable, that this pro-transit thing is going to happen? Where do you think Detroit sits on that? And what do you think could be done to kind of, I don't know, I hate to say make the bus sexy, but make the bus sexy?
I think, first of all, the Facebook comments, I totally feel you on that. Sometimes I'm like, I don't even know if I want to open those comments.
A reader and a listener,
yes,
so you're familiar.
Yeah, I've seen those comments. But for me, making the bus sexy is something that definitely can be done. Other countries and other cities do it particularly well. I think the biggest thing is, if you, there's an old adage, if you build it, they'll come. If you have a good transit service, and if you make sure the buses are clean, make sure the buses run on time, if you make sure that riding the bus isn't a chore, it's really beneficial, and you'll definitely see an increase in ridership. So other cities have seen, if you add bus shelters, make the bus waiting experience better, if you add charging ports or real-time arrival screens to the bus stops, if you improve the app, if you improve the payment system, all of that, just if you lower the barrier to entry where it's really easy for me to just get on the bus and go, and I don't have to think too much about it. I don't have to, plan my day around it. That'll just make the system more attractive to everyone. I think it is generational. I think that, public transit is definitely better for the environment than driving your own car. It's better for the roads. In the long run, it's better for your pocketbook. I spend maybe I want to say $300 the whole year on public transit passes. And that gets me everywhere I need to go. But if I wanted to buy a car, there's so many costs involved with that.
Well, and car insurance, too,
especially
in the city. I mean, I've written about where my car insurance rate, is nearly $500 a month with high insurance. I looked at those. One of the routes that's done very well with signage and things. Have you seen those new bus stations up in Ferndale at 9 Mile with the e-ink displays and the USB chargers? It seems to me like this doesn't seem like a heavy footprint thing, but something that could be done really well. In fact, that bus station was actually made here in Detroit. We have a bus station maker.
Wow. See,
in
I didn't
Madison
know that.
Heights
that
I'm hoping to have on the show.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. And so we have the people here to make it, to build it locally.
Right.
We have all the technology there. If people use things like the transit app, you can get around. There are successes and wins like that. I mean, if we could see more stuff like the FAST system, I feel like that would be an incremental thing that would make a lot of progress. But on the other side, and I have to bring it up, the Q line.
Right.
Everybody talks about the Q line. And somebody who runs around downtown a lot, I end up using the Woodward bus a lot instead of the Q line because whenever it shows up, it shows up.
Right.
What are your feelings on that and what could be done? And I mean, I personally have, heard of multiple plans to expand it, things like that. But I also kind of feel like it needs to be gotten right first. What are your thoughts on it? What could be done to... you looked at improving the bus shelters. What would you do to improve the Q line?
Right. I hate to knock any transit project because I think that any transit project and any transit investment in Metro Detroit is a win. So I tentatively like the Q line. There's definitely things that, if I was, all powerful and in charge, I would have done a little bit differently. But I do like the Q line overall. I definitely think there are things that can be improved. Reliability is one thing. Sometimes the streetcars will come, 10 minutes apart, but sometimes it'll be 20 minutes. And then, if you're waiting, if you're on a schedule, it's a little bit frustrating. Another thing might be the timings, the schedule, the scheduled arrivals. I found those to be relatively inaccurate. I do think it's difficult to track that properly because of traffic and because, you never know if there's like an emergency vehicle on the tracks or if someone's parked on the tracks. And that kind of brings it back to the biggest thing, which is the decision to make the queue line curb running. So running on the sides of the street as opposed to the middle.
The mayor even said that if he were in office, he would not have allowed that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that just being on the curb is where everything happens. People are getting on and off. The bus is even on the curb. So if it was running in the middle of the street, I think it would be a little bit more reliable. And the biggest thing is the fact that we're not giving the queue line dedicated lanes. So if you look at, like any successful rail system, if you separate that rail from traffic, the train will come regularly, it'll be quicker, it'll just be a better overall experience. And that takes a lot of, political will because you're taking one lane each way away from drivers. But something like a mixed transit lane, so if they did the queue line and buses get its own lane, that would increase reliability on Woodward, for all modes of transit. So there are definitely ways to improve it. And I know they're working on a better arrival information system and things of that nature. And so overall, I would say I like the queue line. There's a couple things I wish they did a little bit differently. But overall, I'm not going to, knock any transit project. In terms of expansion, I think that any expansion should take into account, the major concerns that are with the current queue line. So there's been, I think, kind of pie in the sky talk about expanding it up Woodward to 8 Mile or expanding it along Jefferson.
Or Michigan.
Avenue, right, exactly. So if any of that, is going to happen, I think we need to sit down and have a conversation and see, what's gone well with the queue line currently and what can be done differently. So if we do something differently, I think dedicated lanes is the biggest thing. I mean, Detroit's roads are built, for a population of near 2 million. Because at our peak, we had 1.8 million people. And now we're down to about 650,000. So there's definitely a lot of room to have dedicated transit lanes or, increased numbers of bike lanes in the city without, causing massive traffic gridlock. Initially, if you, for example, on Jefferson, when they added the new bike lanes, I think initially there was a lot of backlash because it's it's going to double my commute time.
Well, and the mayor, and from a conversation we had with a few different officials, there was the talk that a lot of that backlash was from folks in the suburbs, like
exactly.
on Jefferson,
in Grosse Pointe,
from Grosse Pointe
right.
who had their commute lengthened because of it.
Yeah, lengthened by 5 minutes, if that. So it's not. I don't think that's an egregious issue, but I think that the bigger point is things like bike lanes and transit lanes and improved transit stops and bus shelters makes the experience for everyone better. It might inconvenience a motorist slightly. But, for the people riding on the sidewalk, for the people, who were riding on the sidewalk and now, using the bike lane, it just improves the experience. And, with the current traffic levels we have, we could probably stand to lose a few car lanes throughout the city, and it wouldn't really make a difference.
So you mentioned about not being all powerful.
Right, unfortunately.
I'm going to ask you, if you were all powerful, what's the first thing you would do to improve Detroit transit?
I think the first thing I would do, I'm going to cheat and say two things because I think there are two things that are really important, would be to implement dedicated transit lanes, especially along major corridors. So, for example, Grand River, Woodward, Jefferson, Gratiot.
So that existing buses would use those lanes.
Mm-hmm, right. And for example, there's a route on Michigan that goes to the airport, the fast Michigan route. And I've used it a couple of times. It's worked well for me. It takes about an hour. But, if we had a dedicated lane, that hour-long trip could probably be whittled down to about 40 minutes. So that would just, once again, you don't want to wait an hour to get to your destination, right? But if it's 40 minutes, that might be something you can work with. So that would be one thing. And then tying directly to my research, I would make sure that we increase the number of bus shelters in the city currently. There is a plan to do that. The Detroit Strategic Plan for Transportation calls for adding 200 new and replacement bus shelters by 2021. So that is something that's in the works. But if I was all powerful, I would take that a little bit farther. Make sure that while we're waiting for the bus, that our experience is the best it can be. Because research out of the University of Minnesota has shown that, if you're waiting for the bus and you're waiting, exposed to the elements, you're just waiting, standing on the sidewalk with no bus shelter or no bench, a 5-minute wait feels like 8 minutes. So that, if you're waiting for that long, it's going to make you disgruntled and make you feel like the transit system isn't working for you. But if you're waiting for the bus at a stop with a shelter, with a place to sit, maybe with a charger, a 5-minute wait feels only like a 3-minute wait. So that, really goes to show that if we improve the experience at the bus stop, we can really improve the satisfaction people have with transit. Because, if you feel like you're only waiting 3 minutes, or if you feel like the bus is coming any second now, that will just, make you feel like the system is working for you.
Sarosh, thank you so much for stopping by the studio. Really interesting conversation. I'm glad we were able to get nerdy on transit. Where can people find you online?
Oh, you can find me on Twitter at Irani99 Sarosh. I won't tweet that often, but maybe I'll start now if I get a bunch of new followers.
All right, that'll do it for today's show. Remember, if you are enjoying what you're hearing, you want to keep up with what we're doing, make sure to tell a friend to subscribe to the Daily Detroit podcast, where we are pushing Detroit's conversation forward each and every day, even on these windy holiday days when, you'd think we wouldn't do something new, but we had to throw a little extra sugar into the baking even if we ran a rerun.
Like we said before, we really love putting these episodes out for you and giving them a chance to breathe again, because I think sometimes, I know we do a daily show, but sometimes we have some really great conversations that can continue to get out there. So thank you for listening.
Absolutely. Well, with that, I'm Jer Stays.
And I'm Shianne Nosserini.
Take care of each other, and let's make Detroit better together.